Meeting to order. All board members besides Denny are present. Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, republic for which it stands, God, indivisible. Can I get a, well, we're going to change the agenda one bit. After the consent agenda, we're going to start with the audit because our person presenting needs to get to another school board meeting. So that'll be one change with our agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Actually, we have to approve the agenda first,
Oh.
then the consent.
Oh,
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Madam Chairman, I will second that.
Have any comments?
I have two comments. Dean Bezick, one of our bus drivers and van drivers, is retiring, and he always did a very good job, especially with the team buses. He would get involved with the fans and cheer us on. And the other one is Irene Shimoda has retired from food service. She was a very hard worker, very excellent worker.
All right, thank you. All in favor of approving the consent agenda?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0. Now we'll have the audit report.
Just want to take this opportunity to introduce Nancy. Nancy Schultzenberg is from Bergen KDV. This is a new audit firm that had this year. Things went very well from our perspective, and I think you'll find her report very valuable and informative tonight.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to take some time to go over the results of our audit this year. And you did receive 4 bound booklets at your spaces. We're not going to go through those tonight. I've pulled the highlights and put them into a PowerPoint presentation. So first of all, as part of the audit, and actually the ultimate goal of the audit is to issue an opinion on your financial statement. So what we're issuing for the New Prague area schools for the year ended June 30th, 2017 is an unmodified opinion, which is the best opinion that we as auditors can offer to you. It's an indication that your financial statements are fairly stated in all material respects based on our audit. So a clean opinion, if you will. In addition to that opinion letter, we have several other audit reports that we issue. The first one is the results of our audit in accordance with government auditing standards. So we're taking a little bit of a closer look at your internal controls and compliance with laws, regulations, contracts, grants, those types of things. Based on that, we did have 2 internal control material weaknesses this year. The first one is the preparation of the financial statements. That's what you've been seeing in the past, simply because we as your auditors take the district's information and put them into the format that goes in your book. We're required to put that in writing to all of you. The other finding that we had was a material audit adjustment, and that was just one thing related to a capital asset item. It's something that a district doesn't look at on a day-to-day basis. It just happens at year end, and it was material simply because of the construction project that you had going on during the year. And then we had one significant deficiency this year that was probably new to what you're used to seeing, and that is the lack of segregation of accounting duties. And as a firm, we take a very serious look at your internal controls and segregation of duties. And this is a finding that I give to every one of my school districts that I work with, because it's really very difficult to completely segregate all of the overlapping duties that occur in the accounting department. So not something that you should be overly concerned about. It's really a cost versus benefit decision whether or not you accept the risk that goes along with that. And there are a lot of mitigating controls in place here at New Prague that reduce it down to a middle level finding. So it's not at the material weakness level, it's at that middle level finding. And again, a very common finding and one that I give to every one of my districts in some manner. Related to the compliance that I mentioned, we did not have any findings in accordance with the government auditing standards. And then because your district receives more than $750,000 in federal funds, we're required to follow uniform guidance or perform what is called a single audit. So we tested 2 of your federal programs, child nutrition and special education, and we issued an unmodified opinion on the compliance related to those programs as well. We looked at the internal control surrounding those programs, we did have one significant deficiency there that had to do with some disbursement approval on some of the expenditures related to that. So that's something that will be taken care of going forward. And then the last official report that we issue is a report on legal compliance. So on an annual basis, the Office of the State Auditor gives us a checklist. It covers 7 broad categories of legal compliance, and we completed that checklist without any findings related to those 7 categories of Minnesota statutes. So that's what's in your financial statement booklet. Then we issue a communication letter, and within there you'll find some financial analysis. We'll go over that at a real high level tonight. And then there are several pages titled Required Communication. That is something that our standards require that we put in writing to you. It talks about the standards we use, talks about estimates in the financial statements. It would be our tool if we had anything significant that we uncovered or if there were any disagreements or difficulties with management, and we had none of those. So I just want to tell you tonight that nothing in that section of the communication letter strays from our standard boilerplate language. And then finally, we issued 2 reports on the audit of the student activity account, and I wasn't planning to go over those unless you have specific questions, as those accounts are not under board control, but they are provided to you for your information. All right, moving then to the financial analysis portion. General education aid is your largest funding source, so we take some time to look at the components of the calculation of general education aid. And the first component, of course, is the formula allowance. So the chart that you see on this slide shows you where that formula allowance has been going back to 2005, just to kind of give you a historical perspective of the increases that you've seen. And you can see for 2017, you did receive a 2% increase in that, and you were receiving a 2% again for 2018. The student count is the other part of that calculation. So we have several charts and graphs to take a look at your students. And the first chart takes a look at your resident average daily membership. So the first portion that has the components listed out here are the students that live within the boundaries of your school district, not necessarily attending here. And you can see that that number is relatively stable in the 5 years that we're presenting. It increased by just 1 student from 2016 to 2017. If we look at the very bottom line of this chart, that's the total adjusted ADMs. So those are the students that are attending your buildings and
Do we
not
have
what
that slide
we
in
do.
our board docs at all?
Yes, I think it was uploaded, wasn't the PowerPoint uploaded?
Because we can't read
I
it.
can't-
Yeah,
yeah,
we can't read it.
Oh,
numbers.
I do
the
have
front.
paper.
Oh, we have paper
Yes.
copies. Would you like a paper copy?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
maybe. I can't see it either.
I can.
Can't-
No.
I can't. You're good.
I'm not as old as you, Jerry.
Long distance is not age.
Oh,
Really small to see from there to there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we're on slide 6. So if we look at the bottom line of that chart, again, those are the students that are attending your buildings. They haven't been weighted yet, but you can see that number increased by 34. So what's coming into play there is the effects of open enrollment. So on page 7, we have a graph that shows that same information, just in a different format. So you can see consistently your residence numbers have been below the students that you actually serve. Sorry. And then on slide 8, on the top we have the weighting factors. So the final adjustment to that calculation is those weighting factors based on grade level. And in 2015, they changed the weighting factors at the state to reflect more consistent numbers with a 1.0 for all students with the exception of secondary students. So you can see if you look at the chart that outlines your students, it looks like 2015 the students actually decreased. That's artificial because of the change in the weighting factors. So if we're comparing 2015 to 2017, that's a little bit more of a consistent picture with the same weighting factors applied. And if we just focus in on 2017, you can see again your residents increased by 1, and your overall total adjusted weighted ADMs increased by 41. And that again is the effects of the open enrollment. In 2016, you had a net gain of 300 students, and in 2017, it was a net gain of 340 students. So definitely more students coming in and fewer students going out than if you look back several years. And this chart again looks at that same information and kind of highlights that decrease in 2015 because of the change in the weighting factors, and then increases each of the last 2 years. Moving then to the general fund, sources of revenue. Overall, revenues were up about $530,000. It's about a 1.4% increase. And if we look at the components, you'll see the local property tax line actually decreased, and that had to do with a decrease in the levy and some abatement adjustments that occurred. So that decrease was offset by a more significant increase in your state sources. That was up about $800,000. A couple of things coming into play there. First of all, the increase in the students that you served increased your general education aid. The 2% formula allowance increased that. There was a new long-term facilities maintenance component that was received as a state source, increasing that number. And then finally, special education aid increased entitlement related to that program. And then your other revenues were pretty consistent year over year. And if you look at the pie chart on the bottom of that page, you can see that your state sources make up 86% of your total revenues. So it's really important to keep track of where the state of Minnesota is at and where their budget is, because that is the largest, by far, largest component of your revenue sources. We look at your general fund budget to actual. Overall, revenues had experienced a 0.8% variance, so really very consistent with budgeted amounts. And if you look to the categories, the largest variance came in the state sources, about $267,000 over budget, and that primarily, or a large portion of it, had to do with the PERA-TRA in-kind contribution. So that has to do with GASB 68 that was implemented a couple years ago, where you recognize now the full pension liability. The state rolled in some other plans into that, and they're contributing to that plan. So the district receives an in-kind contribution to cover part of your proportionate share. So it's a revenue in and an expenditure out. It doesn't affect your fund balance, but it does affect the budget to actual because it's not part of your budget. And we have one last chart that takes a look at the revenues, and this compares your revenues per student served and statewide averages. And we've broken the statewide averages down to a couple different components. The first one has to do with districts of a similar size to new Prague area schools, and then overall state average. We have to look at 2016 because we don't have those 2017 numbers yet. And really what jumps out on these is you can see that overall you're below statewide averages and below districts of a similar size. And probably the largest variance that you have any control over is in that property tax category. You can see districts of a similar size averages $1,450 revenue per student, and for New Prague it's $968 per student. If we look at 2016 compared to 2017, the number increased by just $56 per student served.
What are other local sources?
Other local sources include fees charged, any kind of donations that would come in, really anything that doesn't fall into those categories of state, federal, or taxes. Switching gears then to take a look at the expenditures of the general fund, we just have a pie chart here that shows where your money is being spent. And when I took this chart and compared it to where your money was spent last year, it was really very consistent. And a number of years ago, the state recommended that at least 65% of your funds be spent on instructional categories. So that would be your special education instruction, your vocational instruction, and your regular instruction. And those combined for 2017 were 66%. So right in line with what the state was looking for as far as spending. If we take a look at the expenditures budget to actual, expenditures were actually under budget by about $897,000, which is a 2.1% variance. So again, very consistent with what your plan was for the district. There are three variances that demonstrated the largest variances, and the first one is in the special education instruction. That was about $310,000 under budget. Basically, that's conservative budgeting for, anticipated increased costs in that programming. It's kind of tough to anticipate where your students are going to be related to special education. And then also sites, buildings, and equipment, significantly under budget at $370,000, and that had to do in part to utilities coming in under what was planned, and then also some projects and repairs and maintenance that were under the budgeted amounts for the year. Offsetting those two amounts, your instructional support services was over budget by $388,000, and that had to do with the capital lease. So that is one of those things where we recognize the entire expenditure for the full lease and an operating source coming in, another financing source coming in. So those offset each other as well. If we look at your expenditures per ADM served, you'll see a similar picture for the general fund as you do with the revenue. Obviously, you can't spend what you don't receive, so you're under statewide averages, and that makes sense. If we look at the total here, we have all funds included on this chart. So you went from $14,594 per student to $22,335. And the difference there is accounted for in the building construction. Because of the projects that you had going on in 2017, that number is elevated for the year. Next chart takes a look at the general fund at a very high level. And you can see that we talked about the revenues going up 1.4%. Expenditures were up 5.3%. So overall, you had excess expenditures of just over $1.5 million. That other financing source that you're seeing there is primarily that capital lease coming back in as a source. So when we look at fund balance year over year, it decreased by just over $1,100,000 for the year. That did outperform the budget, which had anticipated that your fund balance would decrease by about $2.7 million. So a decrease in fund balance, but less than what you had anticipated for the year. The bottom portion of this chart takes a look at your fund balances. You can see there are several restrictions. Those are mandated by state statute. You have a new one. The long-term facilities maintenance program was new for 2017, and you had some money left over at year end there. You do have a committed amount that the board has set aside for separation retirement benefits. And then bottom line, you have an unassigned fund balance of $8,469,000. That did decrease by about $862,000 from last year. And when I looked at that compared to your fund balance policy, I think you have a minimum 8% that you'd like to maintain in that number. And right now that was at about 20% at the end of the year. The next chart that we have takes a look at your cash balance versus your unassigned fund balance. And I think this really highlights the need for a fund balance or support of the fund balance. If we look back to 2013, the state had been holding back a larger percentage then, so those numbers were a little closer together. And if you were to take this back even further, it probably was the other direction when they were holding back 36% of your funds to be paid subsequent to year end. So having the fund balance allows you to avoid the short-term borrowing when things do change at the state level. And then we just have one last chart that takes a look at the general fund. And this is just a way that we can compare your district to other districts across the state and your fund balance levels. It's a little bit different than the unassigned number that we just talked about. This is the calculation that the state uses to determine if a district is in statutory operating debt. So that's why we use it, because they calculate it for us, and they have it for all districts in Minnesota. So at the end of the year, that number includes your unassigned and includes that committed balance and your non-spendable balance. And then it compares it to just operating expenditures or the unrestricted expenditures. And that was at 23.9% for the year, down from 28.8% in 2016. But if you look at statewide averages, they've been hovering around that 20 to 22%, so still above that at the end of the year. Questions on the general fund? All right, then we have a couple of charts to take a look at your special revenue funds. First of all, food service. Both revenues and expenditures were up in this fund. Revenues by 3.2% due to increased federal funding related to the breakfast program and increased participation. And your expenditures were up 10.2%, increased food costs along with the increased participation in breakfast program, and then also some one-time expenditures that you experienced this year, some capital items and some severance pay that was paid out of Fund 2 that would be not typical for every year. But in the end, your fund balance did increase just slightly by about $8,000. And then the next slide takes a look at your community service fund. Revenues and expenditures were up in this fund as well. And for the second year in a row, you had excess revenues, and so your fund balance increased by about $139,000. If we look to the components of the fund balance, you have several categories that the state has outlined you maintain separately. The community education actually did go into a deficit, and there were several items that went into that, and the district is working to make sure that that's not what happens in the future. There was one program where expenditures doubled up, and there were 2 in 1 year, and then the outdoor pool, some costs related to that in that community education program. And that is the information that I have for you. I certainly will take questions if you have those.
Out of curiosity, what percentage you have to be in statutory operating debt?
It's a negative 2.5?
2.5.
Negative 2.5.
Good there.
Any other questions?
I don't have any. That
No,
was
I'm good.
All right, well, thank
Good
you for taking
presentation.
some time out of your meeting to listen to me tonight. And I'd also like to thank Sandy and her team. They were very well prepared for the audit, and things went smoothly. So,
Thank you. Now we'll go back to committee reports.
You have to accept the audit report.
Oh, okay.
You want a motion? I'll make a motion to accept the audit report.
I'm sorry. I wanted to thank. I forgot her name. Nancy. I'm sorry. I had to have a delayed. I was too shy to tell you thank you. And then I'm like, if I don't get it in, no. I'm thinking. I've listened to audit reports for the last I don't know how many years, and this one I have to say was most interesting to me. Thank you for someone that
I like to hear that.
I mean, yeah, and I'm.
Well, and these are nice.
Yeah.
It was very yes,
Very
yes.
helpful.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, now do you want to second the motion?
I'll second.
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
The financial reports are accepted as presented.
Gone. He's gone.
Now we'll go to the committee reports. Policy?
We met on October 18th, and we just had a few policies to review, and basically changes were made to match up to MSBA's wording, and then Maren and Lonnie had a couple policies that they had their inputs onto, and then we also have a new service animal policy that was brought on.
Did we not have anything?
No.
I was just gonna add, where I work, we have one that we're training. We have,
Oh,
I mean, so that was a
Okay.
good thing to have that.
Let's see, Southwest Metro and CPAC, we won't have since Denny's not here. Community Ed?
Okay. First item, the winter and spring catalog is being worked on and goes to the printer on November 9th. If you want to be part of the class or something, you should contact by November 9th. A coffee connection began on Monday, October 16, as an opportunity for people to enjoy coffee, play cards and games in color, and visit with friends. The coffee is available from Monday through Friday from 7 to 11. Free will donation is accepted.
Is that in the community room, or
Pardon?
where is that located?
Down by the
Jim?
gym, yeah. See you there tomorrow.
I don't like coffee.
They have hired 2 more fitness instructors for the aquatic center. That will make 5 instructors who teach 5 different classes, 12 classes a week. There are 53 through 6 kids taking the bus to the Science and Nature Conference in Gustavus tomorrow. Currently, the popular courses are Don't Know Much About Civil War, Pickleball, youth wrestling, creepy cupcakes, and ACT prep.
The variety.
Yes, quite the wide range. Thank you. Wellness Committee,
October 11th. Basically, the main thing they talked about was due to the health insurance changing, there will be less wellness funding, and they're not sure of all the options available through Medica yet. They talked about My Health Rewards is something offered through Medica. There are different activities employees can participate in to earn up to $100 per year in gift cards. The activities are a health assessment, consult with a health guide, online coaching, and tracking healthy habits. And also you can do a health club membership reimbursement like a lot of insurance companies do already. And Kim and Jenny also want to try New Prague Area School version of Let's Dish.
where they're going to make dinners for families?
They would like to have employees submit healthy recipes. Then there would be a process contest to select the winning recipe. The ingredients would be purchased and they would make the meal as a group to take home and eat or freeze. Depending on the cost of the ingredients and number of participants, employees may be asked to pay a small fee to participate, less than $5.
I'll do that.
That's about it.
Thank you. Did early childhood?
And no, we have our first meeting in November.
Superintendent reports.
Yeah, first off, just want to again thank our communities for their support throughout this construction period and our neighbors here. We had that open house on October 8th. It was just a wonderful day. Again, thank you to New Prague Times for their coverage. Having that special edition in, I think really helped get us some great attendance, and also K-Check for doing that, and obviously Tony Boothie and Julie Schmitz for all the work they did setting that up. So it was a great day, and we had, and even the meteorologist did a pretty good job that day. So they had it predicted good all week. I couldn't believe it. So it just stayed that way. So it was a very memorable day. I'm also in the midst of doing presentations for the operating levy referendum on November 7th. It's coming up 2 weeks from tomorrow. Probably done about 15 presentations, I'm guessing. Got an open meeting coming up here, right here at New Prague at the CC here this Wednesday. And next Monday, I'll be out at Elko New Market at Eagle View Elementary for 1-2. So those are both open community meetings, and I know Chuck's put those in the paper too, so that's a positive thing.
How many people have you had at the open meetings?
We've just had one.
Were there many people there?
No, that was Lonsdale. Yeah. Okay. The other thing, obviously everyone knows fall sports are winding down here. We've got volleyball playing a home section game this Wednesday. I think they ranked 6th in their section, so that's their highest rating in a long time. We've got cross-country sections this week. Girls swimming today, they're down in the pool right now. We've got, I think, 11 or 12 schools there for the JV conference meet, so a lot of kids down there, and that's going well. And then football is at Waconia tomorrow on Tuesday for the first round of section football, so it's all winding down right now. And the last thing I want to mention, too, is we have the musical coming up.
Legally Blonde.
Legally Blonde. I always want to start by saying blonde legal, but Legally Blonde. That'll be on November 17th, 18th, and 19th. And so Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then on 25th and the 26th following that on the 25th, 26th, so Saturday, Sunday to end it. So more information on our high school activities website too about that. So encourage people to attend. That's all I have.
Thank you. And now we'll go on to the enrollment projections.
Okay, this is the time of year I give updated enrollment projections in preparation for our revised budgeting process that we're going through right now to be approved in December. First of all, kindergarten. It's always the challenge in this district. So last year, we used the county average over 4 years method. We had a pretty long discussion about it when we were meeting at Falcon Ridge Elementary, if you'll recall. Looking back, right now, no method would have predicted the current 310 kindergarten students that we currently have. And we have 7 different ways of projecting. So obviously, something is happening in our district that, looking at county and zip code and even 7-year linear progression, isn't anticipating. So in looking at what should we do for kindergarten going forward, talked it over quite at length with Tim, and we're kind of determining our own kindergarten numbers going forward. And what we decided was to blend the 7-year linear progression and a 4-year county average. That would mean that next year we would have 296 kindergartners. That means we'd be going down 13, 14, 15 kindergartners. And then we'd have 294 in the next 2 years.
And this was supposed to be like 220-something or 230?
285.
Yeah. Originally, back when we had the
yeah.
original
Oh.
study done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this year I'd projected 285,
Yep.
and we're at 310. So, yeah, people are moving into our district, and housing permits are way up in New Prague, and they're obviously bringing kindergartners with them. So, again, that's going to be pretty hard to project. But, we have a good number this year. Next year we're going to project 296, and we'll really see what happens. It's really difficult to project.
Would rather be under than over.
Right. And we looked at, what do we have in our infinite campus system? So right now we have 285 in our infinite campus system for next year. Now we know some of those kids aren't going to come, but we also know new kids will come. And this is the cleanest our kindergarten numbers have been, as far as trying to, weed out the ones we know aren't going to come and, enrolling the ones we know are going to come. So it's the cleanest our system has ever been. I think Janelle would attest to that. And so we're trying hard to get our database correct. But the bottom line is that we don't know about all the kindergartners. We don't always know about them. So, but this is what these projections are based on: 296 next year and 294 for the next 2 years. So where are we at? So I always include a couple years of history. So for last year, 16, 17, kind of that middle section, we had projected 4106, we ended up 4110. So that was pretty good. We're only 4 students off, so that's very good. This year, for 17-18 preliminary, we had 4,123. Currently, we're at 4,200, and I'm projecting then 4,185. We always lose throughout the year, and so you can see how many students that's going up, about 60 students. And then going forward, anything over a couple of years is pretty much a shot in the dark, because it's a long ways out there, but you can see a steady increase there. So those are ADMs, or students that we're serving. This chart is the APU, is the adjusted pupil units for weighting. As when Nancy went forward, you can have increasing students and decreasing funding because of the way students are weighted. So you can see this last year, 16, 17, again, we were within 4. This year, we had projected 4509. We're currently at 4596, and I'm projecting 4579. And then you can see how that goes up over the next several years. But a lot of that is based on kindergarten. You have to remember that. So, my kindergarten projections are very important. So the average growth from the last 5 years is 1.5% a year, and the average for the next 5 years I have is just under 1% increase per year. These are the grade groupings, and this is interesting. So you can see the kindergarten numbers in the really light blue, staying fairly stable, dropping a little bit from this year. The next is the elementary, and those are staying fairly stable. We're looking at 1533 this year and 1575 back up, 5 years. Middle school, we're gonna, right now we're at 960. We're projecting we're gonna get up close to 1,000 as a couple of big grades move through, and then high school we're gonna get up very, very close to 1,500 there if all this continues to happen as I had planned. And then one more look at the charter and open enrollment out versus open enrollment in. And as Nancy pointed out, really our growth is happening through open enrollment. Our resident students only went up 1 last year. And in past years, we've even had decreases in our resident students and increases overall. So we're really growing a lot through open enrollment. And this year, our first look at this year, last year we had 578 in, and this year we're at 603 in right now. So it looks like that open enrollment number is going to be growing quite a bit again this year, based on our October 1 enrollment. So that's basically the information. Have any questions or comments, or I'll be using this to do the revised budget as well as looking at our 5-year financial plan.
What's our capacity of the high school? Is that 1,500?
1,600.
1,600. So we're nearing capacity at some point.
Getting there. Any other questions? Okay.
Good to hear. For the kindergarten numbers.
Yeah, we had a really good, really strong kindergarten. That just drives so much going forward. It's really good to have a strong kindergarten.
And talking to Mike Johnson, there, as of 2 weeks ago, they were over 75 single-family permits issued this year. So I don't know what they'll end up. I'm sure a few higher than that, but it's their highest, I think he said, since 2003. And I'm not, Elko New Market, on the New Market side, we haven't had any. And I still need to check on Lonsdale right now, too. But there's a new development being built in Elko, and which is, we get a lot of kids from Elko into our district, open enrollment.
Great. Next, the liability insurance update.
Yeah, so as discussed at the workshop 2 weeks ago, our insurance carrier has indicated that if the board officially recognizes groups, that our liability insurance will extend to them. So we're asking you to formally recognize the post-prom, senior send-off, powder puff, and the brain power walk run from the foundation. So our liability insurance will extend to those organizations for the events. For the powder puff, post-prom, and senior send-off, we will have more administration involvement in those events to make sure that if our liability insurance is going to cover them, that they are following, the rules and the guidelines that we're setting for. So they'll have to submit a plan, and then we feel comfortable with providing that insurance for them.
And it was background checks, right, if we are to cover it?
Yeah, background checks will have to be done on all the adults. Mm-hmm.
Is there any way, by this definition, to include the summer drama and the morning basketball and the Wednesday night volleyball?
Well, those are all community ed programs? Are they community ed programs?
They be defined as underneath this insurance?
But if they're community ed programs, they're already covered under our insurance.
They're not outside programs. Outside,
They are outside programs?
no.
They're not.
the ones we're bringing in were.
Yes, they were outside programs. But if they're part of community ed, our liability insurance already covers them. Okay?
Have you worked up a list of rules yet, or?
I have not, no. I'll be working with Lonnie and Tom on those.
Who gets involved with the brain power? Is it all going to be, does the Education Foundation have to work with you on the brain power walk? And it's basically the high school and Education Foundation.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
And I assume you'll have them ready to go for spring? Is that the next event?
Yes.
How long does it usually take to get background checks done?
It takes about 24 hours.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Not long. Motion?
Yeah.
I'll make a motion, we approve the district providing liability insurance for Powder Puff, Post-Prom, Senior Send-Off, and the Brain Power Walk Run.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 6-0. The last item on our agenda, Jeannie and I met with Mr. Dittburner this morning to go over the superintendent evaluation. There's an extra handout for all the board members. It's also on board docs, and we just pulled a couple of the highlights from it. We had 6 of the 7 board members and all of the 11 administrative staff that directly report to Tim complete the questions. The results were similar to the past 2 years that we've done this. A high level of satisfaction with Tim's performance. The biggest, well, not the biggest, but one of the goals that Tim set for this year was to effectively oversee the construction project. The board rated that as a 5. I don't think this project could have gone much better than the way it did from my point of view. And, you know, we'd have meetings every 2 weeks to see how it was going, and everyone, you know, there were little hiccups here and there, but I thought it was very well managed, and Tim and Craig were really on top of what was going on. Many of the staff noticed or recognized how Tim reflects the new Prague way. And one of them even said it's been a great tool to use when contemplating numerous situations. You know, if you can go back to those values of the district, and Tim brings that up a lot in presentations to the staff and presentations to the board and to the students. Couple areas that were a little lower, and Tim acknowledges this in his self-review, are the financial and technology, and we have an amazing financial person working for the district, so he doesn't have to do as much as maybe others would. And I think it's good to touch base and go over the goals. If anyone has any further questions from the board, you can talk to me afterwards. But thank you for the work that you've done this year.
Well, thanks. I wouldn't be able to do it without a supportive school board. And the other thing is, like you said, whether it's a construction project or anything, I mean, surround myself with good people and relying on them, whether it's, you know, when you talk about the construction project, the amount of work that Sandy did with the finance part, Tony did a bunch of different areas in planning, and obviously Craig most too. And then using ICS and Wold was a very good decision. And yeah, it was a big project and just slowly coming to an end now. So very happy about that. But thank you for your support.
Thanks.
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes, meeting adjourned.